Our esteemed panelists this evening are, first of all, is Professor M.V. Rajiv Gauraji, former Rajya Sabha member and the chairman of the Research Department, All India Congress Committee. Our second panelist is Ms. Supriya Srinath, national spokesperson, All India Congress Committee. And every day we see her setting the screens ablaze on the debates. So thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Last but not the least, our Honorable Chairman, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament, Thiruvananthapuram. The topic for today is polarization of Indian politics and how pacification is applicable in India. In democracies and other representative governments, citizens vote for the political actors who will represent them. Some scholars argue that political polarization reflects the public's ideology and voting preferences. Political polarization is a natural and regular phenomenon, but they argue that there is a link between the public differences in ideology and the polarization of representatives. But an increase in preference differences is usually temporary and ultimately results in a compromise. So let's not get, I do not want to actually get into too much of details of this, and the experts are with us on the panel. So I hand over the show to Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and sir, I request you to take it forward.
Thank you very much, Zarita, and thank you to our very distinguished panelists, Rajiv Gowda and Supriya Srinath, who've joined us today. We have a very interesting topic, particularly for the All India Professionals Congress to discuss, and that is this entire question of the polarization of our politics, which very many professionals outside politics have been observing and commenting upon. In many ways, one of the things the 20th century is supposed to have taught us is that few things in life are black and white, that much of human reality involves complex alternating shades of gray. But it seems that the one field that is exempt from this simple principle is Indian politics. Our political life and discourse are the last refuge of what used to be called Manichaeism, the doctrine that divided the world into mutually incompatible ideas of good and evil. So everybody in the BJP will curse people in the Congress as if they are completely beyond the pale. And indeed, most supporters of the Congress feel the same way about those who support the BJP. Our politics, in other words, is not supposed to be nuanced. Every debate in the country on any key issue gets divided into binary terms. In fact, we had a famous example outside India and outside our politics when George W. Bush, during his so-called global war on terror, actually said, "Are you with us or are you against us?" And this was a classic way. It's either for or against. There's no way out. And it reminded me, as a student of history and international politics, of the time in the 1950s when India came up with non-alignment as its response to the binary divisions of the Cold War, and the then Secretary of State of the United States, John Foster Dulles, notoriously declared that about non-alignment, that neutrality between good and evil is itself evil. That was their attitude. And there is a story which I've not been able to find any source for other than my own anecdotal recollections. So I will have to confess it might be an apocryphal story, that Dulles asked Nehruji the same question that George Bush asked the world: "Are you with us or against us?" And the story is Nehruji said, "Yes." In other words, I'm with you when I agree with you, I'm against you when I disagree with you, and I will retain the right and the freedom to decide that for myself. But increasingly, we seem to be demanding in our political space only blacks and whites. There is no question of compromise or middle. And our media goes along with this. Our media analyses regularly admit of no other possibilities. One must be either for Modi or against Modi. for the government or against the government. Seeing 20% worth praising, 60% worth criticizing, 20% neither good nor bad in their statements or policies, that's too complicated for our media, our scribes and our analysts to digest. So that nuance is being leached out of our politics. And I must say that it is not just any one side of the equation. We are seeing a sort of degrading of our political discourse as well. I can give you one simple example of the end of bipartisanship in our politics that happened to involve me. I was for 5 years chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on External Affairs. Now, from the very inception of the Parliamentary Committee system, we had always ensured that the External Affairs Committee was chaired by an opposition MP. Why? Because India wanted to send the world a message that our political differences, however passionate they may be domestically, stopped at the borders, they stopped at the water's edge. And that an opposition MP speaking for the Parliament's view on foreign policy sent a signal that all Indians were together in terms of their relationship with the rest of the world. In fact, I, somewhat notoriously now, it seems, said that there is no such thing as a Congress foreign policy or a BJP foreign policy. There is only Indian foreign policy. Well, I had to bite my tongue because last year, when the new parliament came into existence, the BJP decided to dispense with this seemingly permanent convention and instead take over the chairmanship of the External Affairs Committee for their own party. The message was no longer that India is united in relation to the world. The message was, we run the government, we will decide how foreign policies be discussed in our parliamentary committee. So that's the sort of polarization we are seeing more and more. And when the discourse extends so far that
Sir, you've gotten muted for some reason. Can you unmute yourself?
You're on mute.
the host muted, it says the host muted you.
No.
So will the host stop muting me?
Yeah,
Please?
sorry. Please go ahead.
And that happened twice already, so please don't do it again, Mr. Host. Okay, so I've lost my train of thought. What was I on? Yes, our political discourse has reached a point where criticism and expression of free opinion on the campuses is being condemned and persecuted as sedition. Criticism on the streets or in the political forums is being denounced as anti-national. And when you use terms like that, when mere disagreement is considered to be beyond the pale, then the question of finding common ground, let alone middle ground, is impossible. Now, we're seeing some of this in India only in the last 5 or 6 years. It wasn't the custom. It wasn't the convention. In fact, as a biographer of Prime Minister Nehru, I was struck by the extreme importance that he gave to respecting the views of the opposition out of all proportion to its intrinsic numbers, or indeed its strength in parliament, or even its support among the electorate. He felt that it was important to take everyone along in a process of discussion, debate, and education. And polarization was resisted even to the extent of very rarely using the whip within his own party. In fact, he encouraged his own party backbenchers to criticize the government. Famously, his own son-in-law, Feroz Gandhi, attacked the government on a financial scam and brought down the finance minister, was forced to resign. In another famous incident during the 1962 war, there was a debate in the Lok Sabha in which the prime minister made a comment about Aksai Chin, which the Chinese had captured, that not a blade of grass grows there. At which point, a Congress party backbencher, Mahadev Tyagi, stood up, pointed at his own bald head and said, not a hair grows on my head, are you going to give that to China too? To his own prime minister of his own party. Now that was the extent to which different views, a culture of openness, dissent, and discussion was encouraged in our politics. We've come a long way from that to where we are today. Since I've been giving these negative examples about the BJP, let me give a positive one. When I made that speech in Oxford about British colonialism in India, Prime Minister Modi was kind enough to speak positively at a public forum about this and said that I'd said the right thing in the right place or whatever. And immediately our media, so caught up in this polarized narrative, began to speculate that I must be about to switch sides. Television anchors asked me, are you joining the BJP? I pointed out that I had 30 years of published work at odds with what Mr. Modi and his party stood for. But that was irrelevant to the media. If the Prime Minister had praised me, that must mean I was on his side. In other words, it was inconceivable that we could reach out across the political divide. So extreme was polarization perceived to be already, and so much was the assumption that polarization was the only way that we can go ahead in our politics. There's an interesting term that arose in Europe in the last few years, particularly, I would say, in the first few bad years of the financial crisis, and that is a term called PASOKification. I'd never heard of it until this seminar was organized. I began to look it up, and I realized it referred to the Greek Socialist Party, PASOK, which actually is an abbreviation of the Socialist Party of the Hellenistic movement. It was founded by Andreas Papandreou, the father of my good friend, former foreign minister and former prime minister of Greece, George Papandreou. And what the Papandreous stood for was essentially what we'd call today social democracy. Now, what happened to the Greeks? There was this massive debt crisis. The socialists under George Papandreou were forced to accept an austerity scheme, not just by the IMF, but by their fellow European countries in the richer countries of Northern Europe. As a result of austerities, cuts in pension benefits, cuts in wages, and so on. Now, what happened with PASOK was that on the one hand, the right wing was rising in Greece. On the other hand, the left, feeling betrayed by the Social Democratic Party, if you like, they rose in protest against the austerity measures. A more radical left party rose up. And as a result, the party in the center got squeezed between two. I've again been muted by the host. I think the host will have to watch out. Anyway, so PASOK got squeezed and it had 160 seats in the election of 2009. By the election of 2013, it fell to just 13 seats. That's called PASOKification. When a country's main centrist or social democratic party becomes reduced to a fringe party as a result of a more radical left rising on one side, in Greece it was Syriza, and a right-wing party rising on the other side, polarization destroying the middle. And that's something that happens in many European policies more and more. We've seen it in Spain. The Socialist Party of Spain has already shrunk a bit in size. In Scotland, we've already seen the extraordinary phenomenon that the party, the Labour Party in Scotland, which was the principal party for the longest time, has lost out to the Conservatives and the Tories on one side and the Scottish Nationalist Party as a more left-wing, more anti-austerity party than Labour on the other side. Now in India, fortunately, we are not yet there because the Congress occupies the center-left position with a certain amount of confidence. And what's interesting about the Congress Party's occupation of the center is that when it had a long stint in governance, it was very much the party of consensus building, the party of the big tent, the party that tried to bridge divides in the country. And I would argue, why shouldn't our politics be like that? Why shouldn't we allow for mutual expressions of respect and regard across the political divide? Why shouldn't we be able to see or hear the good things said or done by those we fundamentally disagree with? I mentioned Nehruji already. You can disagree with the party's ideology, its worldview, its policies, and still find some areas to have common ground with it. But I don't know if in Indian politics today that's possible. We have reduced our politics to extreme polarization, to black and white today, for or against, nothing in between. 50 Shades of Grey could never be the title of a book about Indian politics. But this vitiates our political discourse in many ways. It reduces democracy to a zero-sum game where everything done by one side is automatically bad and unacceptable to the other. It explains the destructive politics when, for example, when the BJP was in the opposition under UPA, they ferociously opposed even the policy they themselves had worked for. For example, the Indo-US Accord, which they'd begun initiating when they were in government. But once the UPA became the government and was pursuing the same policy, the BJP became a ferocious enemy. And we know from WikiLeaks that they told American envoys, no, we don't disagree with the policy. We are very proud of the policy, but because we're in the opposition, we're going to attack the government on it. We're going to attack them. And the Americans were bewildered by this kind of opposition. But it seems that Indian politics, where you stand depends on where you sit. That is, if you're sitting in the opposition, you'll attack something, but the same policy, whether it's Indo-US nuclear deal, whether it's GST reform, whether it's bankruptcy insurance, whether it's MNREGA, all of these things you oppose when you're in the opposition, you implement when you're in government. I think this kind of polarization precludes the possibility of fair-minded debate and prevents the public from seeing our politicians as well-rounded human beings with minds of their own. Instead, everyone is reduced to a stock caricature defined in absolute terms by their party affiliation alone. This is a disservice to our democracy, which, as Amartya Sen has pointed out, is supposed to be a process of deliberative reasoning, resulting in the best outcomes for the nation as a whole. Democracy is supposed to be an ongoing process, one in which there must be give and take, dialogue and compromise among differing interests. But we have sadly reduced it to a game of kabaddi. Though unlike kabaddi, don't hold your breath expecting the score to change. Those are my opening remarks, and I will now turn to our expert panel and look forward to have them telling us their thoughts on this matter. I don't know if Zarita, you have already discussed with our distinguished guest who goes first, but otherwise I'll stick to the announcement that I have seen, which I think shows, 1 second, I think it shows Supriya. Sorry, is it Rajiv Gowda or Supriya? Who's next?
Rajiv Gowda.
Rajiv Gowda. Rajiv, you have the floor to talk about your perspective on this aspect of polarization. Floor is yours, Rajiv.
Rajiv sir, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I should have actually introduced Rajiv's topic possibly. Rajiv is the AICC research chairman. He was a Rajya Sabha MP. Before that, he was a professor at IIT Bangalore. He's a very highly qualified thinker. Many of us in Parliament have relied heavily on his research on various issues to give us an in-depth understanding of the issues before us. And he's going to talk about the stratification of people by income, by race, by religion, by social structure as a root cause of polarization. Rajiv Gowda, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Shashi, and thank you, AIPC Jharkhand, for hosting this very interesting and timely discussion. Without getting into the complexities and getting back into the classroom with the terminology in the title of this discussion, let me just point out that the title assumes that India is stratified on the basis of income, race, and social structure. Well, India is a very, very complex and diverse country. And when we say social structure, I think that's a polite term to discuss language, religion, caste, and other divisions and stratifications that exist within the country. As far as I know about our own division of labor here today, in terms of who's speaking on what would fall under culture, I think that's the portfolio of my colleague here, Supriya Sreenath. And so I'm going to stick to income, race, and to some extent caste. Now, race as a topic does not quite fit into the larger Indian discussion, because we are a mixed, race in the sense of color. But we do have tremendous diversity even in terms of ethnicity, and and therefore there is a certain sense. If you were to think about our citizens from the Northeast, our fellow citizens from the Northeast, they are racially, visibly different from sort of the vast majority on the mainland in some ways. And as a result, you often hear that they are occasionally targeted because of their looks and accused of being, associated with China or whatever the case may be. And we'll leave that. Let's just think about what the story has been with India over the years. Now, Shashi has very kindly explained pacification as a term. And this is actually a problem with social democratic parties across the spectrum. Europe, in Germany, in many places, you find that the more right-wing parties have become more powerful. In France, again, you've had a similar collapse of the center-left in some ways. And so there's a great concern, and I've been to international parliamentary association meetings where some of us got together and actually were discussing, that we needed to find ways to overcome this. But the basic point is that in India, the left-right spectrum of ideology is a little simplistic. We do have, you might say that Indian ideologies should be seen as a 9-square grid where nationalism is one dimension, economy is another dimension, ethnicity and identity and other such issues are another dimension. So it's not so straightforward to say that all parties fall into one linear one point on a linear left-right dimension. Now that said, basically, what is the history of modern India? The history of modern India, the constitutional arrangement that we're so proud of, is about overcoming these differences. We have put in a tremendous amount of effort to not deny these differences, but to say where these differences are very significant, we will go out of our way to remedy the problems that are involved. But our aspiration is inclusive. Our goals and the nature of our polity is inclusive. So, for example, when you think about income, we right up front, we have implicitly always had the notion of a socialist state. And what is a socialist state? A socialist state is one where you don't have divisions necessarily between rich and poor and the economic stratification that exists, but actually a very, very aggressive effort to ensure that those who have been left behind also get a chance to be part of the economic growth story. And if you were to jump from the founding of the Constitution to, say, the 1990s and thereafter, the era, the post-liberalization era that we've been living in, the post-liberalization era really unleashed a tremendous amount of economic growth, worsening in the process these economic disparities within the country. But what was the response of the Congress and the UPA? It was not to say, let's create a class conflict, let's exploit this stratification, say in the way a communist party might, of essentially polarizing the haves and the have-nots. Instead, we said we will go out of our way to make sure that inclusive growth remains the central agenda. So we came up not just with handouts, as some might criticize them, but we came out with empowering rights-based legislation which recognized and respected the individuality of our fellow citizens and the fact that they found themselves in economically challenged situations for significantly no fault of their own. If you think about our farmers, and I know I'm one myself, the terms of trade have changed dramatically. It is no longer, agriculture is no longer getting you the kind of income that used to allow you to subsist for a long period of time. And as a result, farmers are getting into debt and various other crises, facing, not earning enough in the context of the relative rise in prices across over the decades. So what did we do? When there was a major farm crisis, we extended a huge farm loan waiver in 2008, 70,000 crores, unprecedented in Indian history. But we didn't stop there. We recognized that in the agricultural domain, we had a large number of people who, whether they were marginal farmers, whether they were landless labor, that they were facing a lot of distress and that they needed a social safety net. So we said, let's find a way to create an employment guarantee scheme that will help create rural infrastructure, rainwater harvesting, schools, all kinds of other permanent infrastructure that will transform the quality of life in rural India, while at the same time ensuring that nobody goes hungry. And also, if you were to look at the gaps that were arising in the education space, right? The rich were going to better schools, and the middle class as well, and the poor were being excluded and not getting the same quality of education in government schools. So what did we do? We came up with the Right to Education Act, which ensured that 25% of every school would be accessible to children from disadvantaged backgrounds in the neighborhood. So our instinct has always been big tent, has always been inclusion, has always been affirmative action. And that brings me to how we dealt with caste and other such, historic social stratification, within the country. See, caste has been something that has not gone away. If you were to go on to the matrimonial columns of newspapers every Sunday, you will see everything organized according to caste, and of course a few pockets of caste no bar. But basically, you have a situation where what we tried to do is we said we will come up with measures that make caste irrelevant. Caste, it will just become possibly a remnant of a larger historic, marriage circle in some ways, but it will not have the same social, if you look at the constitution's preamble, we say equality of status and of opportunity. Caste will no longer be the marker of a different status, nor of different opportunity sets. And that's the attention that we put into the Constitution. We brought in very aggressive affirmative action through actual quotas and reservation for Dalits and Adivasis, who were the most disadvantaged at the time of independence. Over time, starting in our states and eventually at the center, we also supported the inclusion of other backward classes in this affirmative action measure. And the Congress Party's larger emphasis has always been that we will use these sort of discriminatory frameworks to destroy the discrimination. If we find ways to bring about transformation by giving everyone an opportunity to participate and grow and share in the successes that the world has to offer, opportunities that the world has to offer, then you will make these markers of differentiation no longer meaningful, and then we will still not abolish reservations. We will look for where else people are suffering because of no fault of their own. So those faults, those challenges may arise in the context of a rural-urban divide. It could be a gender divide. There could be different such reasons for which people are inherently disadvantaged in terms of moving forward and partaking in the world in their full capacity. But our approach is affirmation, inclusion, celebration, and of diversity especially. Our former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, made the statement that the first right to our resources should go to the people who are deprived, who need a chance at the table. And he especially highlighted the fact that minorities, if you look at the Sachar Committee report and things like that they're so far behind on so many dimensions that we must pay attention to giving them a chance to be part of the whole growth story. And we did, through our economic policies, achieve some tremendous impact. The middle class of India, which is now 200-300 million strong, is, and has given India a new self-confidence on the global stage. That middle class is fundamentally the creation of the Congress Party historically. The first few decades was the creation of a public sector, which laid the foundation for a modern India. And if you were to look at a lot of the people who are successful in modern middle class India, It's people who are children of people who worked in the public sector undertakings in the first few decades of modern India. And these people have gone on to become entrepreneurs, to become founders of unicorns. They've gone on to become transformers of India's aspirations and ambitions on the global stage. But the real challenge has been that the same middle class has lost a little bit of the compassion which the Congress party has always tried to bring to the table, to the discourse. And this middle class has often started to shut the train door once they're boarded and the train is chugging along. And this is not the appropriate way to look at the world at all. We have always looked behind and at seeing who has fallen behind and tried to ensure that they get a chance to earn a place on the table as well. And so this is something that we've done through, for example, land reforms in many states across India over time. We've tried to ensure that land to the tiller became a reality. It's happened in Shashi state of Kerala, in Karnataka more than 50 years ago. And, so it's all part of a story that is about empowering, about inclusion. But really, what the current dispensation and the BJP has done is it has started to stoke polarization. It has started to stoke difference. It has started to stoke resentment that all kinds of imaginary victimization stories that are not even true. In fact, one of the challenges in the research department, and I think all of us face this, is they keep cooking up all kinds of new, quote unquote histories that we keep having to say, where are we going to go and fact check this new fabrication from the RSS and its cohorts? And, so it's a real challenge in terms of dealing with this, but this is something that right-wing politicians do all the time. This is a phenomenon that's happening across the world, and they're using this effort at polarization to try and consolidate, for example, the one religion versus minorities, and in the process, they are cooking up stories that are, that have just been amplified by social media and the fake news that permeates the world today, and has really poisoned the atmosphere, across, and the discourse across India. And to go further along with all this, if you think about what the end result is, you just have to look at Gujarat. The Gujarat model is of economic progress resulting in polarization on the basis of religion, it's resulted in ghettoization of minority communities and continuous targeting of minorities in a manner that is exactly opposite of the integration that was always the Congress's approach. And even when it came, I'm done, boss. I'm done. Even when it came to economics, demonetization was sold as it is going to be something that's going to hurt the corrupt rich more than the poor. It's hard work versus Harvard. It's always this kind of divisive rhetoric rather than the kind of inclusive rhetoric that we always wanted to pursue. All I want to say as I end my initial presentation is that I have introduced anti-discrimination clauses, and in the Congress manifesto, we want to ensure that anti-discrimination and inclusion becomes the central driving force that overcomes the appeal to our lower negative senses and to our higher unified sense of what glorious, diverse India is all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but we need to hear from Supriya, and then I hope you will stay for the discussion that will follow. Let me turn to Supriya Sreenage, who many of you will have known first in her avatar as a feisty and very popular television journalist and anchor. I remember being grilled by her on multiple occasions in that capacity. So it's wonderful to have her on the same side for a change. She's come and joined the Congress party and is one of our better known and liked spokespeople who has really taken the message of the Congress party to the nation with great energy and style in the last year. Supriya, we are expecting to hear from you now on a crucial aspect of all of this, which is indeed how polarization has come about into our culture and through our culture. The topic that has been assigned to you is cultural differences as an outcome of polarized thoughts. But I think it works both ways. Polarization as an outcome of cultural difference as an outcome of polarization. I leave it to you to interpret it as you see best. Supriya Srinath, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tharoor. It is indeed a pleasure to be talking with two of the best minds that I admire in the Congress Party, Dr. Tharoor and Professor Gowda. So thank you very much. Thanks to the Eastern chapter and the Jharkhand chapter for having me, because this is an issue extremely close to my heart. Cultural differences as outcome of polarized thoughts. I mean, this is an issue I feel very passionately about. And I think you summed it up beautifully in your opening remarks when you were passing on the floor to me, that is it polarization of thoughts that are leading to cultural differences? I personally believe they feed into each other, and you're absolutely right there. But I think in the India of 2020, which comes first is a question whose answer is still blowing in the wind. I will take the liberty of breaking into Hindi as well. I'm speaking to Jharkhand. It's a place that shares my mother tongue as well, so I will be speaking in Hindi occasionally. But it is common knowledge when we talk about polarization of any form, and I am going to restrict myself to the cultural polarization that we are witnessing. It is common knowledge that large armies and large finances are deployed to engineer polarization. And the whole intention is to widen and create cultural differences, and which is why you see the cultural differences that we are seeing today. And may I dare say, even at the cost of being a little unpopular, that this isn't, it is cynical perhaps for me to say so, but this isn't a one-way traffic. I think sections of both big religions, whether it's the Muslims and the Hindus, have much to be ashamed about. And I am going to begin with a phrase which I think is scorned at. The moment you say idea of India, they tell you, oh, shut up. You know, that's another, Twitterati. That's something that Lutyens Delhi speaks about. But the reality is that we must ask, what is the idea of India? And I think the idea of India is that we were supposed to be a melting pot which existed for centuries with multiple identities, and we were all very comfortable with them. I come from Uttar Pradesh. मैं उत्तर प्रदेश से हूँ. आप सब लोग झारखंड जो पहले बिहार होता था वहां से है, और गंगा जमुनी तहजीब की बात करते हैं. In UP, they constantly talk about the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. The two religions have coexisted. I come from Lucknow. Actually, I was born and raised in Lucknow. And Malihabad, which is so famous for mangoes, you could be a Hindu or a Muslim, you could be enjoying those mangoes, you could be speaking Awadhi. Even our customs were so similar and still are so similar. We had the Mehndi ceremony before the marriage, they have a henna ceremony. So we existed with these multiple identities. There was a fluid identity, these were shared identities. But increasingly now, and I think most of you will agree, increasingly now ये जो हम मिलजुल कर रहते थे, जो हमारी मिली जुली पहचान थी, जिसको हम fluid identity कहते थे, this is increasingly getting hardened. Identities, especially the social and cultural identities, are extremely heightened. And I don't think it is just polarization of religion. And I say that with all amount of respect and responsibility. I don't think it is just religion. I think polarization, like Dr. Gowda said, is happening in all forms. It is caste, it is region, it is language. I mean, there is a genuine concern that very many states in India have about a possible Hindi imperialism. And you can't blame those states, because there is a threat that their mother tongue, whether it is Tamil or Telugu or Malayalam, these languages may get eroded. These languages are being forced to adopt Hindi, and that fear is genuine. I, for instance, जब मैं स्कूल जाती थी और मुझे याद है कि स्कूल में 4 या 5 बच्चों का नाम शर्मा होता था. आज शर्मा लुप्त होता जा रहा है. आज हिंदुओं में भी शर्मा में या तो दधीच लगता है या शांडिल्य लगता है. That is the fragmentation which is leading to these hard identities, even within the religion. Forget about inter-religion. Even within the religion, there is a definite fragmentation of identity. And the whole concept, I think this fear, this fragmentation emanates from the whole concept that we are one country, there is one language, there is one culture. And I think that is farthest from the truth. The beauty of India is, हमारी तो सबसे बड़ी खासियत और खूबसूरती ही ये रही है कि हम बहु कल्चरल, हम हर तरह की संस्कृति को अपनाकर उसको एक बनाकर चले हैं. मुझे याद है कि हम जिस खुशी से और जिस उल्लास से होली दिवाली मनाते हैं, उसी उल्लास से ईद भी मनाते थे, उसी उल्लास से हम लोग बैसाखी और लोहड़ी भी मनाते थे. पर अब ये सब बदल रहा है. और कहीं पर ये बदल इसलिए रहा है क्योंकि देयर इज अ सिंगुलैरिटी ऑफ कल्चर, एक देश, एक लैंग्वेज की बात हो रही है। और मुझे लगता है कि भारत में वो नहीं हो सकता है क्योंकि यहाँ पर बहुत कल्चर है, बहुत स्टेट्स है, बहुत लैंग्वेजेस हैं और बहुत सारी आइडेंटिटीज है, और इन सब आइडेंटिटीज को एक में मिला देना शायद गलत है, और लेकिन ये हो रहा है। और इसलिए हो रहा है क्योंकि रूलिंग डिस्पेंसेशन को ये सूट करता है, ये सूट करता है, ये नैरेटिव सूट करता है। नैरेटिव क्या है? या तो आप मुझसे, और डॉक्टर थरूर ने भी कहा और प्रोफेसर गौड़ा ने भी बिल्कुल सही कहा, या तो आप मुझसे अग्री करते हैं या डिसअग्री करते हैं। और जैसे कि उन्होंने कहा कि शायद हमारे यहाँ शेड्स ऑफ ग्रे की कोई जगह नहीं है, हर चीज ब्लैक या व्हाइट है, जबकि ऐसा नहीं है। जीवन जो है वो बीच में, मध्यस्थता में चलता है। इट इज वेरिंग शेड्स ऑफ ग्रे। टुडे इफ यू डोंट अग्री विद मी politically or otherwise, you are my enemy, you are not my opponent anymore. In 21st century India, if you don't agree with me in 2020, you are not my political opponent, you are not somebody whose views I will disagree and respect. I will agree to disagree, but I will declare you with my enemy, and I am going to attack you till such time that you bow out of a very very ugly feisty fight. But having said that, मुझे ऐसा भी लगता है कि जो लोग हमारी मल्टीपल आइडेंटिटीज को, हमारे मल्टीपल कल्चर्स को खत्म कर ये एक मोनोलिथिक कल्चर की बात करते हैं, पोलराइजेशन कराते हैं, वो सबसे बड़े एंटी नेशनल हैं। बिकॉज कल आप मुझे बताइए कि इंडियननेस क्या होता है। डॉक्टर थरूर गॉड्स ओन कंट्री केरला से आते हैं, प्रोफेसर गौड़ा जो है वो कर्नाटका से आते हैं, मैं उत्तर प्रदेश से हूँ, इसमें बहुत सारे लोग झारखंड से हैं, कोई बंगाल से है। हमारी इंडियननेस क्या है? हमारी इंडियननेस यही तो है कि हम इतने अलग अलग होकर भी एक सूत्र से बंधे हैं, और वो सूत्र है हमारा भारतीय होना। और जो लोग इन अलग अलग चीजों को हटाकर एक सूत्र में बांधना चाहते हैं, भारतीयता को खत्म करना चाहते हैं, उनसे बड़ा एंटी नेशनल कौन हो सकता है? मैं यहाँ पर कुछ पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंसेस की बात जरूर करूंगी। मैं लखनऊ से हूँ, और हमारे लखनऊ में हम जब भी बचपन से होली खेलते थे तो मुझे याद है मेरे मुस्लिम फ्रेंड्स ने मेरे साथ सबसे ज्यादा होली खेली है। इट इज वन ऑफ माय फेवरेट फेस्टिवल्स। I think about 2 years back, I put out a tweet that said Holi Mubarak to everyone. And my God, I was attacked by trolls saying, how are you using words like Mubarak for Hindu festivals? And I was accused of playing to the galleries. I mean, anybody who has been in Lucknow, and my Hindi has a lot of influence of Urdu, and I'm very proud about it. I think Urdu is a beautiful language. I love the language. I'm very, very proud about it. और हमारे लखनऊ में हमेशा होली मुबारक और दिवाली शुभ होता था। अगर आप इसको नहीं जानते हैं तो यह आपकी गलती है, और अगर गलती भी नहीं है, मैं तो ये कहूंगी अगर आप इसको नहीं जानते और मैं होली मुबारक कहना चाहती हूँ तो ये मेरा राइट है, आपको मुझे अटैक करने का कोई राइट नहीं है। लेकिन ये दिखाता है कि किस तरह का पोलराइजेशन, द काइंड ऑफ पोलराइजेशन दैट हैज हैपेंड, दैट इवन होली मुबारक इज बीइंग scorned at. You know, there are questions being raised on that. Too bad. I will continue to say Holi Mubarak. Holi will be Mubarak for me, and Diwali will be Shubh for me. I will also give you one more example. It was Raksha Bandhan, I think, this year. And unfortunately, I lost my only brother. He was my only sibling about 5 years back. मैं सवेरे से, मुझे अच्छा नहीं लग रहा था कुछ, मैं कोई त्योहार बहुत बच्चों ने मनाया, लेकिन मुझे कहीं से कुछ दुख था, शायद उनकी याद आ रही थी। He was one of my best friends. एंड मैंने सुबह सुबह ट्वीट नहीं किया। और पब्लिक लाइफ में डॉक्टर थरूर भी करते हैं, प्रोफेसर गौड़ा भी करते हैं। आप क्योंकि पब्लिक लाइफ में है, यू हैव टू रीच आउट टू पीपल, यू विश देम ऑन स्पेशल ओकेजन्स, ऑन फेस्टिवल्स, बिकॉज एवरीबडी हु इज कनेक्टेड विद यू ऑन सोशल मीडिया इज अ पार्ट ऑफ योर एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली। विद दैट इन माइंड, विद दैट थॉट, यू रीच आउट टू पीपल एंड यू ग्रीट देम। मैंने नहीं किया दिन में, और मैंने शाम को जब किया तो मुझे ऐसे अटैक किया गया कि ईद तो आप सबसे पहले विश कर देती हैं, रक्षाबंधन की आपको देर से याद आई। मतलब कहीं पर मुझे लगा कि पोलराइजेशन की ये हद हो चुकी है दैट एवरीथिंग इज सीन थ्रू अ प्रिज्म ऑफ रिलीजन, रीजन, कास्ट। एंड आई विल टेल यू व्हाई, बिकॉज आई जस्ट फील दैट वी हैव बिकम extremely vicious. We have lost our ability to empathize. I mean, somebody should have said she wishes every day in the morning. Why did she not wish today? But nobody did that. And I just think we have lost our ability to empathize. We are very, very judgmental. I also think we are a very angry bunch of people. Polarization, जिसको ध्रुवीकरण कहते हैं, उसके चलते I think हमें लगता है कि हम बहुत ही ज्यादा गुस्से में रहने लगे हैं। हर व्यक्ति से गुस्सा है, हर व्यक्ति गलत है, बस हम सही हैं। अगर हमारी बात से कोई अग्री नहीं करता है तो वो एंटी नेशनल है, अगर हमारी बात से कोई अग्री नहीं करता तो वो हमारे धर्म को नीचा दिखा रहा है। अरे भाई आपका जो धर्म है वो दूसरे का भी धर्म हो सकता है. और मैंने क्योंकि थोड़ा I digressed, I will come back to the topic. I think and I think Dr. Tharoor and Professor Gora will readily agree with me. About a week back, there was a big furore on a program that somebody wanted to do on a television channel, and it was called UPSC Jihad. और उस प्रोग्राम का सम इन सब्सटेंस ये था कि इतने सारे मुसलमान कैसे सिविल सर्विसेज को क्रैक करने लगे हैं. अगर वो एंकर जोकर जैसे नहीं लगते तो शायद मैं पूरी इज्जत के साथ उनसे ये कहती, क्योंकि वो पढ़ लिख रहे हैं और इसलिए वो सिविल सर्विसेज क्रैक कर रहे हैं. आप भी पढ़े लिखे होते तो आप भी क्रैक कर लेते. चलिए कोई बात नहीं. High Court did stay the airing of that episode, but finally the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has given it a go-ahead, and this episode will go on air. Now, in independent India, in India of 2020, can we question why are Muslims cracking civil services? I mean, what sort of a culture bias, what sort of a bias are we putting before our audience? They are cracking because they are preparing better, because they are studying more. And instead of being inspired by that, we are now questioning it and calling it UPSC jihad. In fact, the pandemic, when the pandemic happened and we were all trying to help out people in our constituencies, I thought it was a brilliant opportunity. And I really, maybe I was too naive to think it will bring people closer. Because in a pandemic, you are against an unknown virus, a deadly virus. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Is this world going to look the same 2 months, 3 months, 4 months from now? None of us knew that. But even in the pandemic, Tablighi Jamaat happened. They were attacked viciously. There were rumors. There were WhatsApp messages, all sorts of vicious trolls. They were labeled as people who were trying to spread corona. I mean, in hindsight, it does tell you that our cultural fabric is being so torn by polarization that we don't miss even an emergency, even an opportunity to attack the other side, because we feel that's the right thing to do, because it's easy for us to blame. I also feel, as somebody who was a very, I would say, a very active student during my college days, I think what polarization also does is it destroys not just the social culture or the culture of communities or religions, it also destroys the culture of protest. And I think the biggest example of that is the CAA protest that happened. And I remember there were so many people who stood against this draconian legislation. They cut across party lines, they cut across religion, region, communities, and they stood against this draconian legislation. What happened? What followed? They were labeled anti-nationals. They were viciously attacked by the paid troll armies on social media. They have been hounded, exploited by the police. They have been hounded by agencies, and some of them are now fighting frivolous, motivated court cases. And I know many of them who've had to really go through this. I feel sorry about it. I feel sad about the fact that people have had to go through this. But the reality is it is happening on account of polarization. And I think we all go back to what was said in the opening remarks of Dr. Tharoor. Either you're with us or you're against us. If you're not with me, you are my sworn enemy, whereas you could actually be my opponent and I may disagree with you. But that said, I will also give you one more example of how the polarization impacts cultures. It is beginning to impact teaching. I should perhaps not be saying this on a public forum, but I will. My son reads in class 8th, and he had an history class. I happened to be in town. He was not wearing his earphones, so I happened to hear a discussion on the revolt of 1857. Now, the teacher, while explaining it to the students, made a very communal assessment towards the end. So me being me, I asked my son, पूछो इनसे इन्होंने ये क्यों कहा? Ask her, क्यों उन्होंने बोला इतना communal, इतना एक religious basis पे argument इन्होंने 1857 के 1857 की गदर को दिया? क्यों दिया? She obviously figured out that, one of the parent has heard, they're not happy with it. So she said, no, this was my interpretation. Now, I respect your right to interpret history the way you want to. What I disagree with is that you cannot teach impressionable minds. You cannot drop a loose sentence about one community, one religion, and try and distort history. I think that is unforgivable, but that is exactly what is happening. Was I being too cautious? I don't know. But मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि एक टीचर होने के नाते एक आपको बिल्कुल आप आजाद हैं, आपके कोई भी इंटरप्रिटेशन हो सकता है, लेकिन आप इंप्रेशनेबल माइंड्स को आप 13-14 साल के बच्चों के सामने एक ऐसा लूज कमेंट छोड़कर खत्म कर देते हैं चैप्टर, और उनके दिमाग में वो लास्ट वर्ड उसका रह जाता है. मुझे लगता है ये पोलराइजेशन है, और पोलराइजेशन अब सिर्फ पॉलिटिकल लेवल पे, सोशल लेवल पे नहीं, इस तरह का पोलराइजेशन हमें देखने को मिल रहा है. In the end, I think I will definitely talk about Mahatma Gandhi, because it is not as if you cannot be religious. It is not as if you cannot have your identity, but you still don't need to polarize. I mean, anybody who knew how devout a Hindu Mahatma Gandhi was, he sang Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram. His last words were Hey Ram. He fought against polarization all his life. In fact, उनकी हत्या भी एक ऐसे व्यक्ति ने करी जिसका ध्रुवीकरण में यकीन था, जो पोलराइजेशन की बात करते थे, वो एक ही धर्म की बात करते थे, उनको लगता था कि बाकी सब गलत हैं, सिर्फ वो सही है. और महात्मा गांधी को, जिसको विश्व ने महात्मा कहा, उनको हमारे ही एक भाई ने मारा अंत में. और मुझे कहते हुए भी दुख होता है कि जिस गांधी के अंतिम शब्द हे राम थे, उसको हम जय श्री राम बना दिए. और जय श्री राम, मैं भी भगवान राम की उपासक हूं, इससे पहले कि कोई मुझे बोले कि मैं भगवान की अवहेलना कर रही हूं, मैं भगवान राम की उपासक हूं. I pray before the Lord, I bow my head before the Lord. But Jai Shri Ram in itself today is not invoking Lord Ram. It is not invoking the glory of the God. It is an assertion of a Hindutva identity. It is not Hinduism. It is an assertion of brute, and may I say a very masculine identity, because Shri Ram was always known as Siyavar Ram. He was always invoked with the name of his wife, Sita, and which is why I think some better sense prevailed on the Prime Minister. And when he did go for the foundation, laying the stone for the foundation of the Ram temple, he spoke about Siyavar Ramchandra ki jai. So look at how we've traveled from Hey Ram to Jai Shri Ram, and what has become of this. I just think from a controversial thought point of view, I'm ending, just last sentence, I'm ending. I think a thought experiment may help. About 3-4 generations ago, at least my grandparents and their parents, our ancestors were overwhelmingly people who placed their trust in Gandhi. His sense of Hindu was Sarvadharm Sambhav. He spoke Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram, but he also said Ishwar Allah Tero Naam. It is the same genetic pool. And look at where we have taken Hey Ram to. Today, Jai Shri Ram is polarized. It stands for brainwashed. And I think if we want to stand for a country that is truly inclusive, we need to get rid of this.
Thank you, Supriya. Thank you very much. We are a little over time, everyone, so I'm going to quickly hand over to Alim for the question and answer round, which will have to be a short one. But before we do that, I do want to add one more detail to your very valuable and important point about the so-called UPSC jihad. What is shocking about the assumption, the bigoted assumption behind this is not just that Muslims, like anybody else, are passing exams and coming in, but in fact, Muslims have come into the UPSC only at 4.3% success rate, whereas they are 14% of the population. So if anything, we need affirmative action to give more coaching to underrepresented sections of our society, including Muslims, rather than decrying this very modest success as a jihad, which is, I think, utterly disgraceful. But thank you for giving that example and all the other examples you gave. Alim Javeri, I'm handing over to you for the moderation of the Q&A, which will have to be brisk and brief since we are already almost at 6 o'clock. Floor is yours, Alim.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Hello, everyone. Thank you for organizing this wonderful event. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We have quite a few questions, but just quickly before we get into the questions, I wanted to make one point because everyone's talking about Muslims. I happen to be a Muslim, and I happen to be working for AIPC. I work for Dr. Tharoor. I've worked in the United Nations. I feel othered, and I think I speak for many communities, not just Muslims and Hindus, women, minorities, people of any intelligence who feel that the current identity of India is one of confrontation. It's of capitulation. It's not of consensus. It's of conformity. And as long as I'm aware, as I'm an Indian, I have relatives who are Hindus. I'm proud of the fact that one of my grandfathers is Hindu. Two of my grandfathers, in fact, are Hindus. that my family chose not to go to Pakistan. They chose to remain in India, even though they were Muslims. But what is the price we've paid for that? We've paid for 60 years of decent life, of a comfortable life. And now all of a sudden, some people think they can turn it around and say, you're not an Indian, you're the other guy or you're the other woman, and your rights, your enfranchisement is somehow second. I'm not going to stand for that. I'm not going to take it as some sort of a, this is your kind of place, or this is where you have to be. मेरी अधिकार है, मेरे विचारधारा है, और मैं इस देश का युवा नागरिक हूँ, और कोई ताकत नहीं है इस देश में, इस दुनिया में, जो मुझे कह सकता है कि मैं इस देश का नागरिक नहीं हूँ. With that, I just wanted to, sorry for that, I was just a little upset about some of the, the realities that we're facing with. We have quite a few questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break them up into two batches. If I could request Aditya, Mr. Bhuvesh Thakur, and Professor D.K. Singh to just say your three questions one after the other, and then we'll go to the second bunch. Aditya?
Hello, everyone. My question is to my mentor, Dr. Tharoor. How the changing pattern of Pasukification can be seen in Indian politics? How it will have its further impact?
Perfect. Thank you. That's to that's to Dr. Tharoor. Mr. Bhavesh Thakur.
I think he's not there. I have a question to Supriya Srinath ji, if you allow. How can you explain, ma'am, Indian politics has weakened its influence on head of people with cultural supreme position?
Wonderful. And I think you had a third question, I was told. So can you please ask Professor that question?
Yeah, and to Gowda sir, can we see economic crisis as the reason behind the political polarization and its instability?
Perfect. So that's three questions for our three speakers. So if we could start with Dr. Tharoor.
Well, I'll give a short answer given the late hour. Very simply, I think that Pasukification in that form is not yet a major Indian problem. Polarization is in our politics, but Congress is not in danger of being outflanked on both sides. Yes, there is a right-wing alternative to the idea of India that we have celebrated for 7 decades. That is the idea of a Hindu Rashtra. That is the idea incarnated by the BJP, which is now in power for the last 6 years. But we are not being outflanked on the left. In other words, we continue to occupy an important centrist position in the country. And along with that centrism, a certain emphasis on social justice, on the welfare of the poor, the marginalized, the minorities, and so on, which gives us, if you like, a certain stand. Now, undoubtedly, there are regional parties that have taken away some of our support base. Let's not deny that. So the danger of Pasukification in the Indian context is not like a Syriza coming up as it did in Greece, but rather of a whole splintering of the Congress support base through a large number of regional parties. I don't think that's going to happen, largely because the Congress represents an idea that is really shared by a vast majority of our people. We just heard Supriya Srinath's passionate invocation of the kind of notion of India that we have just been fighting for. And I think that therefore we will be able to hold that center. But I wouldn't be complacent, and I agree with you, Aditya, you are right to signal that this has happened in some parts of the world, and we cannot afford to relax and say it'll never happen here. We have to work hard with courage and strength to preserve that safe center in our country. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Supriya ji?
Anand, did he say Indian politics is cultural supreme position? I didn't get the question. Can you just quickly repeat?
Aditya, could you repeat your question, please?
The one for Supriya.
You're on mute.
How can you explain, ma'am, Indian politics has weakened its influence on people with cultural position?
So, I have a lot of inherent faith in our democracy and in our politics. And I will tell you why. Everything to do with our politics isn't wrong. Everything in our democracy isn't rotten. We have survived 73 years after independence as a cohesive unit. I think nations go through a cycle of this. Yes, there is a rise of the right wing. And yes, there is this attempt to build a monolithic culture, one nation, one country, one language, and all of that. But I think inherently our pluralism, inherently our multiple identities are very, very strong to completely dissipate. I have an inherent faith in that. As far as cultural, I don't know, I still don't get it, but as far as cultural supremacy is concerned, who is who to decide who's culturally supreme? I think over the years, the Congress party has stood for affirmative action. We perhaps have to fight for more ground on that going forward.
That's a very, very, very nice answer. Thank you. Prof.
Yeah. So, yes,
Aditya, would you? Sorry, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I can go ahead. From what I understood, it's about economic polarization and what are the prospects going forward. See, what we are seeing is actually not enough economic consciousness on the part of people, because what people should be angry and upset at the terrible mismanagement of our economy over the last few years. Just in the last few months, we've seen 2 crore plus salaried jobs being lost. So where is the anger? Where is the? So we don't need to turn it into something negative. We need to turn it into a critical commentary, a critical mobilization, which says we need better performance from a government that has, has been ushered in twice with a magnificent mandate. But the truth of the matter is, we are lucky because the millions of people, migrant workers who marched back home during the pandemic, during the lockdown, did not, go become riotous mobs. They did not burn the cities down in anger at the way they were being treated. So we still have a chance at ensuring that people can aspire to positive futures. But the other danger that exists is, I've seen these in certain parts of the country where this religious polarization involves also boycotting businesses of other communities. Now, unless we learn to engage in what's called quotidian commerce every day, pay attention to the multiple religions that are involved in supply chains, we end up creating divisions and hatred that is actually economically counterproductive as well. You've seen how the cow protection agenda has actually caused a lot of problems both for the leather industry as well as for farmers who have to deal with marauding stray cows. So there is potential, there's a lot of attempt at polarization, but we have to take the differences and use them to open people's minds and hearts to what's going wrong economically, and to say that we've got a good track record of turning things around, and it's time to trust us once again and to vote these guys out who are totally incompetent at managing the economy. And I certainly are not compassionate either.
I appreciate that. Direct as always, Prof. Thank you so much. Honorable panelists, we've got 3 more questions from 3 different people. So I'm going to request those 3 people to ask their questions one after the other. So we're going to start with Professor D.K. Singh. If you're there, sir, would you please unmute yourself and ask a question? Professor Singh? Okay, we're moving on. Professor Singh, can you unmute yourself? All right, so we have Kayati Munjal. Are you there, ma'am?
Hello. I have one question from Snehan Madam.
Yes, I am here, Alan. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we'll just take Professor Singh's question first, then your question, and then Mr. Afsar Imam's question.
Okay, thank you.
Professor, if you could ask your question, please.
Supriya ma'am, अभी आपने कहा गांधी का नाम अभी 20-25 सालों से स्कूल में गांधी जयंती के दिन हम लोग छुट्टी कर देते हैं। सारे युवा पर गांधी के देश में गांधी के सिद्धांतों से दूर हो रहे हैं। इससे हम लोग कैसे निपटेंगे?
Okay.
Did you get that, Supriya ma'am?
Questions? Yes, I did. Should I answer it now?
Okay, perfect. No, we'll take Kayati Munjal's question as well, please.
Yeah, my question is to respect Dr. Shashi Tharoor, sir. I am really very honored that I just got this opportunity, sir, to talk to you in this platform. So I've read almost all your books, and my favorite is like Why I'm Hindu, and I love the show business. And I'm still looking forward to read Harur Shururs. That is your latest one, sir. I'll be glad to read that. So my question to you is, when we talk about raga of secularism, how to tune to sustain and balance the melody? Like often we talk about the raga of secularism. So can you please highlight on this?
The raga of secularism, is that what you said?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Raga of secularism. Yes, sir.
Perfect. And I actually wanted to ask Prof one question. Prof, you and I know each other for a long time. We've had the privilege of working together. You've been a professor. You are a professor. You've been an honorable member of parliament from the Rajya Sabha, but you've been through such a consequential time, both in the Congress Party and the work that you do as a professor. Could you just share one or two points that you've seen about the young people who you have interacted with? You have a very young team, and how they have been motivated as a result of all that's going on currently in the socioeconomic climate. So we've got the three questions for the three panelists. We can start with Dr. Tharoor.
Well, okay. I mean, I must say the raga of secularism is a lovely expression. If by that is meant that there is a sort of underlying harmony and underlying melody, that all of us in India belong to the same space, as Supriya had very eloquently described it in her intervention. And Kayati is right that this is very much under threat. It's under threat by people who frankly have what used to be called an inferiority complex. That is, that they are sadly completely afflicted by a sense of past humiliations. They have a massive chip on their shoulder about the way in which our country was in the past attacked and ruled by people who came from outside. Whereas the secular attitude is to accept with pleasure that we absorbed all these various influences and made them ours. The bigoted view of the Hindutva brigade is that somehow there is a pristine Hindu state that everybody who came from outside has to be rejected by. And I think that is a very dangerous as well as an ahistorical idea, because ultimately the strength of Hindu civilization has lain in its absorptive capacity. You were kind enough to mention my book, Why I'm a Hindu. The Hinduism that I speak about is the Hinduism taught to us by Swami Vivekananda, who very famously said that he spoke of a Hinduism that not only preached tolerance, but acceptance. What did he mean by that? Tolerance, after all, is a virtue. We've all been taught in school that a tolerant king is a good king, etc., that everybody who tolerates others is a virtuous person. But when you really think about it, toleration is a rather patronizing idea. The tolerant king says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will generously indulge you in your right to be wrong. What Swami Vivekananda says that the Hinduism he's talking about actually preaches is, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And not only is that a wonderful evocation of the accepting nature of Hinduism as a faith, but it is also an indispensable prescription for living together in a multi-religious society. We can call that secularism. I'm actually not terribly fond of that word because in the English language, secularism involves the absence of religion, a distance from religion, whereas what we have practiced in India for 70 odd years is actually toleration or acceptance of a profusion of religions. So I would have preferred a term like pluralism rather than giving the Hindutva brigade an easy target to shoot at by talking about secularism. But that's a vocabulary difference we can discuss separately. What I believe that secularism as a concept practiced in India taught us all is that we must learn to live with the other despite differences of religion, of region, of caste, of language. All of these things have been mentioned by our panelists. Alim talked about his religion. Zarita comes from the Northeast, where we have seen that people coming to Delhi and other places from the Northeast have suffered unjust discrimination. Supriya mentioned the question of language. जो हिंदी, हिंदुत्व, हिंदुस्तान बोलने वाले हैं, उनके मन में एक ही किस्म का देश होना चाहिए, ये जो डाइवर्सिटी है, ये जो राग है, विभिन्न शब्दों की राग जो है वो पसंद नहीं करते हैं. So I want to stress that when you speak about the raga of secularism, it is a raga to which all parts of India, with all their differences, contribute to make the best possible music. And it's sad if indeed that raga is not being played anymore by those in power who ought to know better.
Thank you, Chairman. Supriya ji.
Thank you so much, sir. It was lovely listening to you.
Thank you, guys.
At the frequency at which you're now writing Hindi tweets, your next book must be in Hindi. I'm presuming so. But moving on to the question that Professor Singh raised on Mahatma Gandhi, it is sad that at a time when we are so fractious and when the world has turned to Gandhi, we have distanced ourselves from Gandhi. And as a professor, you worry. As a citizen, I worry. And because we have people in our parliament who have called Nathuram Godse saint. We have people in our parliament who have enacted how Gandhiji was shot. So it does worry me, but I go back to the fabric of this country and I have inherent faith that it is too strong to be distorted. It is frayed. I'm not going to say it is not frayed. I will not be in denial. It is frayed, yes, but I believe it will not be completely destroyed. And I'm presuming that inherent faith that I have in this country will ensure that Gandhi lives on. For now, I'm extremely worried about how the idea of Gandhi and the life of Gandhi is being ridiculed by the kind of people who are in power and how they conveniently choose to invoke Gandhi when they want to and demonize him and let some in the party demonize him because it's convenient.
Thank you, ma'am. Prof.
Yeah, Alan, that was a very good question. I've been very lucky over the last few years to have worked with a large number of youngsters, very idealistic youngsters who are also believers in the inclusive approach of the Congress party. And they are all aghast at the way the country is getting further and further polarized. But they're also, I would say, reasonably upset with us for not doing enough to counter the slide, the divisiveness that is permeating India. And it's really a little bit of a challenge here because, in our own capacities, we are trying to strengthen the Congress. We're trying to strengthen secular forces. The fact that Shashi led the formation of the AIPC, that we've built a research department that continues to generate output, but imagine how much more we need to do when everything is going to hell, when institutions are crumbling, when people are facing false cases. We're not able to do enough to change the narrative, to turn the nation's attention to the kind of misuse of institutions and the slide into everything that is the opposite of the idea of India. So really, what I do get from my young idealist friends is more prodding and basically, people saying, we wish you were able to do more. And that's really the lesson that I think we all need to take forward. I think Shashi in his domain, Supriya in the TV channel bouts, all of us are trying to do things in different ways. But really, we have so much more to do. But there's a large constituency of idealistic youngsters who want to put this divisiveness and hatred behind us, who want to embrace what the Congress has historically stood for, and it's up to us to rise to that challenge and deliver in full measure.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you for what you do, particularly, the research department. I don't think any of the Congress MPs would be able to do anything that they do without the stellar work of you and the wonderful team that you've got. And I know from my colleagues and from you just how passionate you are about these particular issues. In a world of fake news, to have correct facts and figures is just as important as showing up. So thank you, Prof, for all that you do. Thank you, Supriya ji, for constantly standing up to the forces of divisiveness and bigotry. And Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much for giving a young guy a job and also for just being you and representing the country of India and the values of India with the eloquence and grace and, more importantly, fortitude that you do. I conclude my part here, and now I hand over to my senior colleague, Sarita ji, for the vote of thanks.
Just before, we have the vote of thanks by the state president of Jharkhand. Alim, I kind of share the same sentiments as you. And sir, thank you so much for mentioning that I come from the Northeast. Alim, when I first came to Delhi over 2 decades ago, I never dressed the way I dress today. I came in my regular, pantsuit and the way we dress back in the Northeast. And I was targeted very badly. And then I decided to change myself instead of getting targeted time and time again by the way I speak. They made fun of the way I spoke my Hindi. So I definitely worked hard on it. And I hope I have done quite a good job at it. But yes, discrimination is there. And over the years, it forces a person to change his or her identity in order to be able to fit in. So I think that is something that most of us face, but most of us do not want to speak about it. But sir, thank you so much for mentioning that. And without a further ado, Aditya, over to you for the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much. The whole session of talk was full of sapientiality. I thank my mentor, my guardian, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji, for explaining us about Pasokification very well. I thank Professor Rajiv Gowda ji, Supriya Srinath ji to enlighten us about the cultural differences, and Professor Gowda on stratification of people due to ideologies. Today, if we see in today's norms, political ideology is generalized among youth. Either they support or they are against without any absolute and concrete concept to figure out to relate with. Majority is following the pure like herd with no idea where to land. This is time to awake. The youth at the end of the day is the torch bearers to host and generate an awareness to uphold the exact agendas should be kept above all the ideologies for different corners of demographies. As Supriya Srinath ji said about Lucknow, Lucknow is also very close to my heart. It's my second home. And I stay in Kabir Magh. Like you have been trolled for saying Mubarak, I want to say to all my fellow Jharkhandis and all the Indians, agar Hindi shan hai, to Urdu jaan hai. I want to thank Alim Zaberi ji, and we Congress party are a secular party. I'm using this word secular again. We can see our regional coordinator wearing orange today. So this is what shows Congress party is. And I thank all the members of E-Zone and Ishika Sharma ji especially for choosing such a good topic, Pasokification, change of ideology. And I thank Arnav De ji also. And for the Indians, I want to say a small line before ending up. We Congress people, ये पीढ़ियों से पीढ़ियों का संबंध है, ये दिल से दिलों का बंधन है, इस मिट्टी को सर्वस्व अर्पित, मेरा तन मन जीवन समर्पित. We are congressmen, we are AIPC, and we'll always see we are for the people. Thank you so much. Thank you all the dignitaries. I say pranam to all of you, johar to all of you for enlightening us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor, Supriya ji, and Professor Gowda ji. Thank you so much again. And we're really grateful that you all made time for this evening.
It has indeed been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dr.
Thank you for making the time, Supriya and Rajiv.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you all and enjoyed the discussion. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.